Welcome back, Flyers Nitty Gritty fans, to Getting Gritty with It with your host, Yariv, Wolok, my partner in crime, Vasili, Gianarakos, back for another episode. How are you?
Doing well, Yariv. I mean, in terms of hockey, we're in the dead period right now, so we're kind of scraping topics together to chat about and to get into. But considering the time of the off season, there is still a decent amount of stuff to talk about from a Flyers perspective
Yep.
and league wide in general. So we still have a great episode for the fans here. It's gonna be a fun one. How about you, man?
It's crazy. I'm good, man. It's crazy. It's the first week of August already, and I'm like, rookie camp opens in like 5 weeks already. Let's
Yeah,
go.
right.
Let's go.
Matvey Michkov's first action in a Flyers
Yeah.
jersey very soon.
You want to hear something real stupid? My sister's getting married on September 14th, and I'm kind of like, ooh, I hope there's no Flyers stuff. I don't know the dates, but I'm
Reeves
like,
gonna be like at the
yeah.
wedding party, like on his phone, like
Right, yeah.
watching
Yeah.
like debut Michkov rookie game. Like, hey,
Yeah.
don't worry about the wedding. Michkov's
Right,
playing
yeah,
right
yeah.
now.
Um, yeah, it probably will fall right before it, if I'm doing my math right. But they're for those
Hopefully, don't have to miss anything.
yeah,
But
for those NHL EA NHL fans of the video game, we should be getting information about that game right about mid-September. I'm very into video games. I'll have an announcement about video games in the somewhat near future. But I buy that game every year, and I'm always looking forward to, like, please give me a substantial update for the season mode, because like
they
I
have it in years. Yeah.
dude, I bought this one. I literally have not played I bought it day one, a
Oh my.
single game. I have not played it once. The only thing I've done is play around with the Flyers roster. I like literally use it the same way I use Puckpedia or Cap
Like
Friendly.
a cap management tool almost in a
That's
sense.
that's it. A $70 tool for that. It's like, um,
It's funny because I buy it yearly as well, have
yeah,
since like probably
I always do.
2006 at this
Yeah,
point. And it's always been fun to play, but I feel like the quality's kind of declined year after year. They made some changes in this upcoming iteration and they were okay, but I wasn't the biggest fan. But it's funny because this was you said like you bought this day one. This was the first year in like 10 years where like I waited because I always noticed that it usually drops to like 50% off or 30% off after a month and a half. And I'm
dude.
like, there's really no point in me buying this full price. Like I'm not gonna pay it, so I may or play it. So I may as well pay a considerable amount
No,
less. You know?
you're absolutely right, because it comes out in October, and then the holiday sales kick in
Yeah, exactly.
November, right? The Christmas sales, and then in November to December you have those Christmas sales. So the game drops by like 35% at least. So yeah, don't blame you. And I remember even looking at the price, and I'm like, I have not played this once, and I paid almost double for this
Like,
right
why did
now.
I do this?
You're right. Yeah,
Why did I do
exactly.
this to myself?
I just always buy it. I'm such a gamer. For those who are not aware, I have everything. I've been obsessed with video games since I was like 6 years old. I've talked about it. It's the reason I got into hockey. Was my dad downloaded NHL 20 on my computer, a demo of it when I was a little kid, and I was a huge soccer fan. And then I played the demo, and that was pretty much it. Became obsessed with Mike Modano, and I had two teams available: the Sabres and the Dallas Stars. So I learned them, and then once I bought the game, learned the Flyers, and that was pretty much it. The hockey obsession just continued to grow from there, and I never looked back. So I'm really hoping, because I did not like the changes they made. I also work in software development, so like I looked at what they prioritized.
It was counterproductive,
I
really.
I didn't think they were great ideas this year, so I'm really hoping they take a look at that and do something better this year. Most cynical people will look at that and be like, "Good luck, it's EA," but I'm hoping. Let's
Yeah,
put it that
it's
way.
not a big title for them too, so they just see it as like, who cares? Somebody's buying it. That's good enough for us.
Well, I agree with that, but it is, um if you look at their long roster, it is in their like top 7, 8 games. So it does bring in millions of dollars of profitability, but overall you're right. Like, especially with the NCAA game coming out, there's just, there's games that are more profitable for them. But I would hope that there's a saying in in design and development that limitations create opportunity. And they are limited by their budget, but they have exceeded that. You know, they at one point, I think this was the Alexander Ovechkin cover 2007 NHL where they introduced the skill stick, like the actual ability to move the stick. That was like monumental for
Yeah,
the
that was
game.
game breaking. Exactly.
So like they didn't need a huge budget for that. It's just you got to target the right things.
Get the right features
And
out,
right,
pretty much.
exactly. Not hut mode, which is just a money grab, and I hate that mode.
Pay and
Uh,
play. Yeah, exactly.
I hate that stuff. All right, so let's get into it. We have Charlie O'Connor coming on the podcast. You know, we'll take a break from me, Vasili and I talking, but then we do have some topics to talk about afterwards. Let me do the quick intro here. So just want to remind everybody, please like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell on YouTube for notifications to find out when our episodes are coming out. If you are listening to this and you have not subscribed, please do so. It is the best way to support our podcast. Also, you can follow us on iTunes and Spotify for the audio version. Unless I drop the ball and forget to hit publish, they come out at the same time, which I have done that quite a bit. But the audio version will be available when the video version is available. So you can follow us there and get that, and give us a rating there as well on Spotify and iTunes. That's also extremely helpful to us. So if you could do that, it'd be great. And also shout out to our sponsor, Jim Steaks at 4th and South. Make sure to go to Jim Steaks to go get yourself a cheesesteak. They are reopened as of May. They have one of the best cheesesteaks in the city, if not the best cheesesteak in the city, and a brand new look and feel to their place. So make sure to go check that out and get yourself a cheesesteak from Jim's. And also Summit Public Adjusters, 215-752-0560. Use them as your weapon to keep your insurance companies honest. Have them evaluate your insurance claims. Again, that's Summit Public Adjusters. And also just want to give a brief shout out to our new partner, Sports Spider. Guys, if you're tired of searching for multiple websites for sports news, sportspider.com has you covered. They collect the latest articles, videos, and podcasts from around the web and organize them by your favorite teams. If you want to stay as up to date as possible on our Philadelphia Flyers and the NHL in general, hit the link in the description to check out sportspider.com. Again, they are our partners. We are stapled at the top of their site. So they push our content for us, and we push theirs in response. So we're their official Flyers blog. So if you guys can support them, that would be great. Again, the link is in the description. All right, let's take a break right now. We'll introduce Charlie O'Connor, and then we'll be back afterwards to review. All right, so now we welcome to the show PHLY, I don't know, representative, but the Flyers guy at PHLY, also one of the biggest writers in the area that covers the Philadelphia Flyers. I would say up and coming star, but I think you've kind of been around for almost a decade already. But
Yeah.
Charlie O'Connor, welcome to the podcast.
No, it's great to be on. Thanks for having me, guys.
For sure, yeah, we're looking forward to it, man. We both listen to your podcast from time to time. We always enjoy your rational take on everything. It's kind of what we try to do here on, yeah. And I know I like Bill. We've had Bill on here before too, and Bill's great. But things, they can get off the rails, and I always appreciate that you kind of try to bring it back into, you always try to take both perspectives. You're pretty even keeled. You never try to go too far one direction or another. And you always kind of give that chance that you could be wrong, right? Like, which doesn't exist on Twitter. Let's be honest.
There's just not enough characters for it. That's
Right.
that's the problem.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
You gotta pay extra to have nuance. All right. Let's get right into it. So we have a few topics. Obviously, there's not too much to talk about because not that much is going on. And we've talked about some of this stuff on the podcast already, but we want to get your specific opinion here for the audience. And just we'll just roll through it. So let's go first thing. There's a lot of question marks about this team, arguably more than last year, even though there were a ton last year about kind of where players stand and where they were going to make kind of their return, and guys like Sanheim, what can we expect with Sanheim, what we're going to get with Ersson, and we still have a lot of questions. And at the same time, you look at that, you don't necessarily see a playoff team. Like when you see a bunch of questions and a lot of them are unanswered, the risk is high of underachieving, but there is risk of overachieving too, right? There is that opportunity there for a lot of these players. In your mind, what do you like? How maybe you can give me a percentage, or frankly, let's go maybe examples of players that you think are slighted to kind of take a step forward, and something you would bet on to, let's say, keep the Flyers at least as competitive as they were last year. They could potentially take a step back, but there is a chance that they could take a step forward, or at least stay where they were in a more competitive division from last year. Where do you kind of see things with like Tippett and Farabee and Frost and Airson, things like that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of room for growth with this team. I do totally agree with you that the risk profile of the team is higher, which it's going to be when you're a team that didn't make the playoffs last year, and aside from Matvei Michkov didn't get any better. They in some ways got worse. You don't have 2/3 of the season of Sean Walker on the back end, who was really good for them last year. You don't have half of a season with Carter Hart, who was solid in goal. The goaltending is in question to a degree that it wasn't going into last season. So yeah, there's absolutely parts of this roster you look at and you say it's not as good as the team that didn't. I mean, they stayed in it, but they didn't make the playoffs last year. Right. And you also assume that teams like the Devils are probably going to take steps forward. Maybe a team like Ottawa or Buffalo will take the step forward next year that people thought they might take last year but didn't. Sure. That said, I do think there are a number of guys on this team that have the potential. Let's call them high variance players, where I could envision a scenario where they're not very good, and obviously that's going to hurt the Flyers. But I could also envision a scenario where they take a big step forward and suddenly a weakness of the team turns into a strength. One guy who I think absolutely fits that mold, and he's probably the guy that out of these types of players I'm the most confident in. And don't take that to mean that I'm certain he's going to be great. Sure. But I think by the numbers, like I'm expecting this guy to, at the end of the season, have significantly better numbers next year than he did this past year. And that's Sam Ersson. And the reason is because his numbers were good last year until they ran him into the ground and overused him over the final 2 months of the season. And I don't think they're going to do that this year. Now, whether Ivan Fedotov, who's slated to be the tandem mate for Ersson, warrants those starts and plays well enough to justify them, I don't know. But I think even if Fedotov struggles, I think they are still going to use him regularly with the goal of making sure that Ersson doesn't wear down the same way he did at the end of the year, because they threw an insane workload at him at the end of the year. And Ersson, understandably, wilted a little bit. He finished strong. He had a few good games at the end of the year, which was great to see. But it was pretty clear that I think both physically and mentally, he was tired, and his play suffered for it. I think he's a good goalie. I don't know how good of a goalie Ersson is. I don't know if he is a bona fide, above average, number one, guy you can give 55, 60 games a year to every year and have him put up an above average save percentage. I'm not sure. I hope he can be that guy. For the first half of last year, it looked like he had the potential to be that guy. But I think he can be a lot better than the final numbers of last year just by getting normal goaltender usage, which is very much what he didn't get at the end of last season. So to me, I don't even think Ersson necessarily has to get any better from a true talent standpoint to put up significantly better results. I just think he needs to be used in a more intelligent way, which I think they plan to do. And then if he gets used in a more intelligent way and he takes a step forward in terms of his technique, in terms of his his overall talent level, then suddenly you're talking about an exciting player. Because I think if Sam Ersson had not been ran into the ground, I think he probably finishes last season. I'm going to spitball here and I'll say like somewhere in like the 900 to 905 save percentage range. Like, I don't think he's finishing above 910. I don't think he's, dark horse for the Calder, dark horse for the Vezina, anything like that. I think his numbers at the end of the season end up looking pretty decent instead of where they ended up being, which was at the 980 spot. Like, I think if he just is the same guy he was last year, and doesn't get overused in the second half, I'm expecting him to at least improve 10 percentage points in terms of his save percentage. And if he actually does improve from a true talent standpoint, then suddenly you're thinking, hey, maybe they could have a legitimately solid starting goalie here. And as much as all the other positions matter, there's no position in hockey that has a more outsized impact on the outcomes of individual games than the goaltending position. And if the Flyers get good goaltending, they're going to be in the mix. And I think Ersson has the potential to provide that. So he would be my number one. Do you guys want me to go into some others who I think have upside?
Sure. I mean, we can. I do want to ask you something about that, and I would like to hear more of your opinions on the other players with the defense kind of, I wouldn't say in flux, right? Because for the most part, it's the same core minus Walker. Do you think that it might be a more difficult game for Ersson without having Sean Walker? Do you think that that could affect his numbers too? I'm kind of in the mindset that I do expect these guys to get better as a unit together, playing together. Do you think it's kind of like a washout at that point, and that they can, that Jamie Drysdale can help fill in that role, and they can fill in with the guys that they have to continue Ersson's momentum where it doesn't become a burden on him in some kind of way?
Look, I think it's possible that the defense could regress. That's certainly possible. I mean, the idea of replacing, because what they are essentially doing, and it's not quite a one-to-one swap, because obviously there was a time when Drysdale and Walker were on the team at the same time. But overall, you're basically swapping in Drysdale for Walker. That's what you're doing. And that could be a significant downgrade. Now, the Flyers have high expectations for Jamie Drysdale. They think they can turn him into a significantly better player than he has been to this point in his NHL career. They love his upside. We'll see if they're right. But there's the possibility that Drysdale, going from Walker to Drysdale, could be a dramatic downgrade. There's also the possibility that guys like Travis Sanheim and Nick Seeler, guys who I would say significantly exceeded expectations last season, they could crash back to earth. I mean, we've seen what Travis Sanheim looks like when he's not playing well, and it's ugly. Last season, Travis Sanheim was really good. I personally am a Travis Sanheim believer, so I think he's going to have another perfectly solid season, but I can't be 100% certain because I've also seen Travis Sanheim have bad seasons. I've seen him have a couple of them. So you can't rule out the possibility that he flops. And Seeler, 3-4 years ago, he was barely hanging on as an NHL. Again, I'm a believer in Nick Seeler. I think he's a quality defenseman, a guy who you could probably put anywhere from the 4th spot on a defense to the 6th spot on defense, and he's going to produce solid results. But I can't be 100% certain he will, because he has kind of come out of nowhere in a little bit of a way to establish himself as a legitimately above average NHL defenseman. So there is the possibility that the defense regresses significantly, but overall, I'm not that concerned. I think it will be worse if we're just looking at the defense score, because I do think Sean Walker was really good for them. And while I think they can get more out of Drysdale, I'm not sure it's going to be like a snap your fingers and he's good moment. I think it's going to take time. I think he's going to learn and adapt to the Tortorella system, to the way they play in the defensive zone, and just develop as a player normally. For maybe the first time in his NHL career, he's going to have the opportunity to develop as a player normally. I think he is going to be on an upward trajectory, but I don't think it's going to be like Sean Walker, where he popped in and immediately was like, oh man, Flyers have a quality second pair defenseman right off the jump. I don't know if that's going to happen immediately for Drysdale. But what I will say too is that even if the defense core is a little bit weaker on paper, that's not the team defense. The team defense also includes the forwards. Yeah. And John Tortorella has this team playing a committed, unified style of play. And unless they turn on the guy, which I don't think they're going to, I guess you can never rule out the possibility. It is John Tortorella. But unless they turn on the guy, I don't think they're going to stop playing unified team defense at a high level. And if they keep doing that, I think Ersson will be fairly well protected, and he'll be put into a position where, again, I'm not expecting him to put up a 920 save percentage, but I don't think he's going to be in a position where he's going to be facing a deluge of high quality chances every night. I think the Flyers are going to be committed enough to John Tortorella's playing style that they're going to prevent that from happening, and that really should be enough to at least allow Ersson and hopefully Fedotov to stay afloat.
Yeah, that
Vasily,
makes a lot of sense. Definitely. I think, at least for the goaltending aspect, Charlie, like it's always an iterative process with a goaltender, especially a young goaltender coming in, playing their rookie season in the NHL, like Urson has here. I mean, he had a pretty solid rookie season when you factor in, how other goalies perform in their rookie years. I think too, the main thing obviously is the workload, right? You look at that workload that you mentioned. Last season was actually the most games he's ever played at any point in his career, across SHL, AHL, obviously NHL, it was his first season. So I think if you can really give him, an ability to not have to play every single night, that you probably do see him, give a lot more solid performances versus, what we saw down the stretch from him, which was a little bit of a collapse, but you have to factor in when you're playing every single night as the rookie in the NHL. It's really, really difficult. I do think the defense too. I mean, it could have an effect there, as you mentioned. It really depends in terms of, if they're giving up really great high danger chances against. Obviously, that's going to be tough for any goaltender. A goalie's only as good as the defense in front of him. So if you're bleeding chances all night, especially on the power play as well, where the Flyers really cleaned up their penalty kill last season. That can really, have an effect detrimentally on a goalie. So I think if the penalty kill can stay solid, that'll be a big help for Urson there. I think an X factor for the defense probably just to maybe fill that gap for Walker. Not to say that they play similar styles, but Rasmus Ristolainen kind of showed a bit of reformation under John Tortorella in terms of being solid defensively. We'll see if he can keep that up. Obviously, a lot of injuries for him last season, so who knows how he's going to bounce back. But I think for the defense as a whole, it'll be interesting to see what he can contribute, if he can contribute on the same level that he was in the past. And, it could possibly even end up being sort of a trade bait for the Flyers where Ristolainen, bounces back and they look to move him due to that bounce back and see if anybody maybe bites on him if they're trying to remove some sort of salary. And just to circle back, Grief, to your initial question, just looking at, what percentage of players might be able to take a step forward. I think a lot of the young guys on the team, there's a handful of players I'm earmarking or looking at. Like you look at a Tyson Forster who really had a strong finish to last season, potentially taking another step there. Morgan Frost, if he gets to play with Matvei Michkov for majority of the season coming up, how much of a boost will that be to his game offensively? Can Owen Tippett take the next step? Obviously, with these players, there's always a potential of the downside of it. Maybe they take a step back as well, but I think there's a good number of them that could take step forwards, that could take steps forward that could, maybe help the Flyers continue to remain competitive around that playoff bubble, like a Bobby Brink, for example, as well. Even some other players. So who knows how it's going to play out, but I think they do have some pieces in play that you can't really one way or another predict whether or not they're going to, perform more positively or negatively. It's really just a wait and see situation at this point.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, Charlie, let me circle that back to you because Vasily was talking about the forwards there. A guy that I think everybody was really impressed with and is, I don't want to say he didn't have a huge statistical jump, but the dynamic game started to come out a lot more and his kind of game breaking ability started coming out more as Owen Tippett. And I do wonder, where do you kind of see him landing this year? As he seems like kind of I want to say an X factor, just because he is the closest thing to a fully developed, let's just say, scoring winger outside of Travis Konechny. A guy who really has potential to, in my opinion, I don't know if you agree with this, but being a 40-goal guy in the league. Do you think he inches closer to that? And what part of the Flyers' success kind of relies on that this year? If he comes out and puts up another, 27, 28 goal season, that's great, and that's fine for his contract too. It's not a complete loss. But I think a lot of people are hoping he kind of takes that next step. Do you think that, one, does he have the capability of doing that this year with this current core? And what kind of impact do you think that would have on the Flyers in the standings? Maybe not dramatically, but is that enough to kind of keep them, in that playoff at least bubble?
I think Owen Tippett absolutely has the ability, the physical ability, the talent to
Yeah.
be a 40-goal scorer. I don't know if he has the consistency. Like, I just don't know if he's ever going to put it together where he has an 82 game season where he's just lights out the entire year. he always might remain a guy who will have 2-3 week stretches where he just looks like one of the best goal scorers in hockey. And then he's just kind of there. He doesn't hurt you. He's not a liability, but he's not racking up goals all the time. I I think he probably has at least one season in the future where he's going to just go off. I don't know if that's going to necessarily be like his new normal or if that's just going to be he had that 1 year where everything broke his way and he scored 44 goals.
Yeah.
But obviously the Flyers with Owen Tippett, they're hoping that one of these years he pops off, he jumps from, low 20s, high 30s to low 40s, something like that. And then he stays there. Because if that's the case, then suddenly the $6.2 million cap that he has looks like an outright bargain, and you're talking about a ton of surplus value in that deal. I think the way I look at Owen Tippett, though, is I'm hoping he takes that step, but I'm not expecting it. There are other guys, like, for example, compare him to a Tyson Forrester. I am expecting Tyson Forrester to take a step. Now, I don't know if it's going to happen this season or one season down the road, 2 seasons down the road. I don't know. But I think he is ultimately going to get to the point where he is at least a consistent 30-goal scorer that drives play at 5-on-5 and has real two-way value. Yeah. I think he is going to take a big leap from where he is now. Cool. With Tippett, I'm unconvinced. He's a good player now. He shows flashes of greatness. I think I'm going to approach Tippett with the mentality of, it's perfectly fine what you are now, and if you take the jump, it's a nice, pleasant surprise. I don't think the Flyers necessarily should be counting on it, but to answer your question about does that squeeze a few more points onto their total if he takes that step, it absolutely does. I mean, if Owen Tippett's a 40, 45 goal scorer next year and isn't giving all that back by sacrificing defense to do it, then yeah, I mean, then suddenly you've got Tippett as a high-end goal scorer. You've got Travis Konechny, who has produced over the last few years like a borderline 40-goal scorer if you look at his rate stats. Mm-hmm. You've got Matvei Michkov, who, look, I don't know what they're going to get out of him as a rookie, but it's going to be something. Like, it's certainly going to be quality. I don't think he's going to be a wash. He's going to improve this forward core.
Yeah.
You have those three guys up at the top of your lineup, and where they actually fit in terms of lines and who's with who and whatever – not as big of a deal as like the amount of ice time they're getting. If those are your three highest minute forwards and they're all borderline, if let's say Tippett and Konechny are point per game 40 goal scorers and Michkov scores somewhere between 50 and 60 in his rookie year. Yeah, that pushes the Flyers very much into at least keeps them in the playoff bubble. If not, pushes them into the wild card race, as one of the teams trying to fight off the teams on the playoff bubble. Again, not sure if it's going to happen, but yeah, if Owen Tippett takes the leap, that would be huge for the Flyers. 100%.
Yeah,
he certainly has the skill.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I was just going to say, Yariv certainly has the skill to do so. I think, at least for Tippett, Charlie, the main point, and just to jump off what you were saying, is probably the power play. Like, the Flyers' power play has been so bad these last 3 seasons, dead last, essentially. You have a guy like Tippett with the huge shot. Will they be able to improve the power play so they can potentially actually utilize that shot? I mean, that remains to be seen, but that's, I think, where you would find some of those extra goals, right? Like, to maybe push him over that 30-goal mark, get him closer to that 40-goal range. So for me, that's where I'm looking for the improvement from Tippett on the power play, and probably as a whole for a lot of their forwards in general, right? If they're going to get more production out of them, it's going to have to be with the power play improving, because I just think there's only so much more you can squeeze out of these guys 5-on-5 as they did last season, which was a lot. What was your thoughts there, Yariv?
Yariv, yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking that this team needs an X factor, an additional one. That's all I wanted to say in between there. Go ahead, Charlie, please, if you had a comment there.
Yeah, no, sorry. I thought you were flipping it back to me.
No.
But
say whatever you want. Okay. Whenever you want.
I think you're 100% right, though. I think that the power play is going to be pivotal, and that's where you're really hoping that Michkov is going to have his biggest impact. Because, look, Michkov if his talent level translates, he's going to be good in all situations, but the power play has just been so bad.
Yeah, with time and space, right?
Yeah, like if Michkov can just make the power play even just normal bad, like not 4 percentage points worse than everyone, but just like, it's like 18%.
Yeah.
Still probably in the bottom half of the league, but like 18 to 20%, it's
Let's
passively
go.
mediocre.
Yeah.
If it's just that, not only does that help a guy like Owen Tippett, where it certainly could, and Tippett could be the beneficiary, but I've made the case that Travis Konechny's stats are probably deflated by the fact that the power play stinks.
100%.
Like Travis Konechny's a really good player. He's made it clear he's not a power play driver, but you can be a good power play forward without being the guy who drives the power play. It's just the Flyers don't have a guy who drives a power play. Hopefully they now have it in Michkov. So Konechny's numbers could get better. Joel Farabee's numbers could get better. I have a season review coming out on him for tomorrow at allphly.com. And the first 50 games of last year, he was an elite 5-on-5 producer.
Yes.
Yeah.
He fell off the final
of the
32. Yeah. He was at the top of the league in terms of 5-on-5 production. Final 32 games were bad after the All-Star break, to be sure. But if he can come back next year, produce like that at 5-on-5, and then get something on the power play, maybe playing the bumper with Michkov, suddenly you're looking at a really exciting player when you look at his overall stats. And I think there are a lot of guys on this team that have seen their boxcar stats, your goals, assists, points, things like that. It looks worse than it probably is in terms of evaluating their true talent because they don't have a power play. And if you get a power play on this team that is remotely functional, a lot of these guys that people are probably more down on than they should be suddenly look a lot better.
100%. I mean, you could be talking about a 10, 15, 20% increase in productivity, just in point output. And, I just saw Daily Faceoff release the worst offenses in the NHL, and the Flyers were obviously on that list. But again, I really like what you said there, because I think it is a bit deceiving, because 5-on-5, they weren't terrible. It was really just their power play was so horrendous. And it's funny, you never hear Flyers fans begging for mediocrity. In this case, we would love mediocrity. So let me ask this question, because I actually had this later, but this loops right into it. If the Flyers have a terrible power play once again, let's say it's a little bit better, but let's say it's still in like 29-30, right? Rather than just rock bottom. Is Rocky Thompson going to remain the coach of this team, at least the assistant coach of this team? And I know it's not his only job, and I would argue he's done a decent job in other aspects of the game, especially, like we said, 5-on-5. He does contribute into that as well. But that is a huge part of his role, running the power play. And it's been bad, and it does not look like it's improved. And I don't really believe the excuses of the talent. We were saying that in the very beginning of the season. You don't need that much talent to be mediocre on the power play. Maybe not great, but not mediocre. Where do you
look
see
at the Sharks last season?
Yeah, well, that's just one example. Well, where do you see the where do you see the Flyers kind of taking that decision with Rocky Thompson? I imagine there'll be loyalty there, but at a certain point.
Look, I think where I'm at with that is I don't fully know. I would like to believe, however, that if a power play with Matvei Michkov on it is continuing to be at like the 13, 14, 15% efficiency rate for a full season, if that happens, that you can't justify keeping Rocky Thompson. And maybe you shift the roles around where he only coaches the forwards and you bring in a power play specialist coach. That's been done before. Other teams have done things like that where they bring in a power play specialist to teach, to scheme, things like that. Maybe you do that if you are dead set on the idea that Rocky Thompson needs to be part of this coaching staff in some way because what he brings to the table is integral. I can't see any way you can sell. It was already hard enough to sell to the fans after this season that Rocky Thompson deserved to keep his job. If they have another god-awful power play season with Michkov in the fold now you have your high-end talent guy. Now, we'll see how it translates, but from a pure skill standpoint, Michkov has the high-end talent that the Flyers lack. Now you got one of those guys. Now, to me, it's kind of sink or swim time for Rocky. And the Flyers did say at the end of the season, Briere said this, Tortorella said this, that they're going to be bringing in not outside voices, but voices within the organization to like kind of consult let's call it like an inside consultant, guys like Patrick Sharp, guys like John LeClaire, guys that are already in the organization that thrived on the power play as players to kind of come in and provide their 2 cents on what maybe the Flyers could do tactically. But last year, I agree with you that it wasn't quite accurate to just say, well, it's just the talent. That was part of it, to be sure. They didn't have a lot of guys that fit roles that tend to lead to success on the power play, but there were other teams that had less talent than the Flyers that did better on the power play. So that wasn't a very satisfying explanation. This year, though, now you got Mitchell, okay? And you're banking on your young guys taking a step, getting a bit better. So presumably, if your development staff is any good, your young guys, your youngish guys should all be 1 year better this time. And you add Mitchkov to the table. There really shouldn't be any excuse to at least, like clear 20%. We're not the bar isn't even that high. Like
Right.
just clear 20%. It's not that hard anymore. With the talent they have, they should do it. And if they don't, I'd like to think that there would be consequences. I just don't know how much they like Rocky. Like, I know they like him a lot. That is undeniable. Do they like him enough to deal with a third consecutive year of an awful power play to keep him around? I hope not, but I can't say for certain that they won't still keep him around. Maybe Tortorella just loves him and thinks he's the next great NHL coach and just won't fire him. I don't know.
It's hard to tell. Like,
what one
sorry,
comment? No, sorry, Vasili, I cut you off there. Just one thing I want to add. Typically at companies, when you see someone's role and bits and pieces of it are handed off to other people in the company, a lot of times that is a prerequisite to getting fired. Now, I'm not saying that that's exactly what they're doing. I think they're doing like all hands on deck, but it is somewhat of a public admission that he hasn't been that adequate in that department, right? They didn't verbally throw him under the bus, but when you say, oh, we're all putting our heads together, it's like you're kind of going, well, the guy who was brought in to do this didn't kind of, he didn't meet that mark, right?
Yeah. Well, it's almost like somebody directly, to your point, Yariv, directly overseeing what your role is,
Right.
which for Thompson, I mean, the major part would be the power play. I think for Rocky in general, like with the talent of adding Mitchkov and just the extra elusiveness that might bring to your power play, there shouldn't really be an excuse for being last in the league again, whether it's just like a 20% or, just potentially even getting into like the 25 to 30 range or something along those lines. I do think that them being bottom of the barrel again with this all hands on deck approach of adding in a Patrick Sharp, potentially John LeClaire, even Briere chiming in, that probably would spell the end for him. But we'll have to see how it plays out. You have to hope, with some of the younger players taking that step forward and, being 1 year older, adding Mitchkov and maybe his ability to kind of deal the puck from behind the net, which I don't think they've really explored too often these last couple of years. Maybe there's an extra wrinkle in the power play where you can open up some things that you haven't in the past and you have, them take a little bit of a step, kind of become that or enter that mediocrity range that we're hoping that they can enter from the terrible range. But we'll see where it goes. Though I think if they're last again, he's probably on his way out.
I think that's probably fair. So we'll do two more topics here. Charlie, will try not to hold you on too long. So this is one that's kind of a bigger question, and Vasili kind of brought this up before we recorded as a good topic, and it's something we've talked a lot about here. I've definitely heard you talk about it before too, and there's this large contingent. I don't even know if they're large, but there's a contingency of there's a group of people on Twitter who want things done now, and there are some people who are more patient. But we're kind of waiting for this team to improve. I think most people are under the understanding that this year is not the year that the Flyers are going to be gunning for the playoffs. And some people are really upset about that. Some people want them to tank harder. But what Vasili and I both kind of point to is we do see this as a business and we go follow the money, right? And the money itself kind of points in certain directions, right? That there is a very limited amount of cap space. If you look to next year and the following year, it opens up somewhat next year and then considerably the following year. Even with the players they have to sign, with the cap going up, they should have a substantial amount of cap space, more than we've had in a large amount of time, unless they do something crazy between then. But I would anticipate the Flyers are kind of waiting their window. And then you look at the way they built up for this upcoming draft. They do have some kind of plan. They're not necessarily telling us exactly the nuance of that plan, what that window will be. But what do you kind of see as the aggressive window for 2025, potentially 2026, or maybe even beyond that? How do you kind of see this window of, let's say, 24 to 36 months? And I know that's a long time for a lot of people to wait, but typically businesses will plan out, 1 to 3 year cycles. They don't think just in, the 6 month cycle. They're trying to plan their window, right? They'd have a core of guys who are about the same age, and they do have some younger guys coming, and they're going to try to inject that again. So they kind of, at least they have those ELC contracts mixed in with their core guys where they can really make a playoff push, and then potentially, and I think we both agree because I've heard you say this before, make that big trade that they need to make to bring in a top name player from around the league, catching a team in a vulnerable position, and then get that kind of icing on the cake that can help push you from being a borderline playoff team or a wild card team to being a top contender in the league. So how do you kind of see that? And how do you see things playing out over the next, let's say, 1 to 3 years?
Yeah, I think based on what I've heard, reading the tea leaves, talking to people with the organization, doing on the record interviews with guys like Danny Briere and Keith Jones and whatnot, if I had to guess what the general plan is, it's that they turn the corner in 2026. I think that is where their heads are at right now, in that that's when the books are almost completely cleared. I think the only bad contract that would still be on the books in the summer of 2026 would be the Ryan Ellis deal. And in theory, they could just pop that on long-term injury reserve if they really need to. He's never going to play again. That's when the cap opens up. That would be after year 2 of Matvei Michkov. So you're hoping, okay, originally that was going to be Michkov's first season because that would have been when his contract, which is why I think even more that was always the plan. The plan was the original plan was, if we got to wait 3 years for Michkov, we have 3 years to get our shit together.
Yeah.
For Michkov. And then when Michkov gets here, it's full speed ahead. Now they have 2 years to develop him in-house, which I think they're really excited about. But I still think right now their head, based on the moves they made, based on the contracts they were willing to take on, based on the years left on those contracts, the buyouts they were willing to do, the retentions they were willing to do, I think they've always been focused on 2026 as the summer when they make the pivot. That said, and this is important, I could envision a scenario where they speed it up. But I think that would involve, number one, Michkov hitting the ground running as a rookie and being real good from the jump. Like, I'm talking, like, he's a point per game guy as a rookie. And a couple of the young guys take step forward. Maybe they make the playoffs next year. Then I could see them taking a look at each other and being like, we got Matvei Michkov, a star already, with 2 more years left on an entry-level contract. We got some of our money coming off the books, not all of it, but some of our bad money coming off the books. Maybe we accelerate this a year. Instead of getting into this in 2026, we get into this in 2025. Again, the players are going to dictate that. And that's something Keith Jones has said a couple of times, that the players are going to dictate how long this rebuild takes. If Michkov is a star from the jump, if, let's say, Owen Tippett scores 40 next year, Tyson Forrester scores 35, Sam Harrison finishes with a 9-10 save percentage, and suddenly this team, no, it's not a cup contender, but it looks like a good team. I think they could accelerate the timeline. If, however, next year the Flyers go and, Harrison struggles, Drysdale doesn't take a step forward, none of the young guys really, they either stagnate or take mild steps forward. Michkov scores, 40, 45 points as a rookie. Then they're going to look at it as, okay, we need another year to build. Maybe we make a trade, maybe we sell some guys. We continue our general plan of preparing for 2026. If next year's a good year, though, I could see them accelerating it. But next year has to be a good year for them to do it. The players will need to convince the front office that 2026 is no longer the pivot year. 2025 is the pivot year. And that's just going to be on the players proving they're better than a lot of people think they are.
Yeah, I agree, Charlie. I think to jump off your point as well, in
Well
terms
said.
of 2025 becoming that year where they might want to turn that corner and become more aggressive, obviously depends on a lot of the young guys taking a step forward, as you said. And I mean, if they do take a step forward, you got to think about all the draft capital that they might have that they could utilize to make those trades. So I think that's when that kind of comes into play. You look at them having 6 picks in the first 2 rounds. I can't really remember a team like going back even 10, 20 years that actually picked 6 times in the first 2 rounds of the draft. You'd have to like go probably way back to find that. So if you look at that, history probably tells you that the Flyers might not make all those picks. They may make some trades. And if they are, and end up kind of performing a lot better than expected, and you do see young guys take that step forward, you do see Matvei Michkov, become close to that point a game guy, maybe they try to use some of that draft capital to get more aggressive, kind of speed the process up. And just to point out as well, like I'm on Puckpedia, and their projected cap space for the Flyers in 2025 is 14.45 million. And then their projection for 2026-27 is 36.65 million. So really, when you do outline the money of it, 2026 does seem like that offseason where not only will they have a considerable amount of money to spend, but maybe they, try to get creative with that cap space in a certain way as well and bring in other assets. So it'll be interesting to see what they do and what they plan to do. But I mean, it definitely looks like with the money kind of earmarked for the next 2 years that it could either be 2025, depending on what happens this season. 2026, though, is probably the more likely, just all things considered.
Yeah, I really hope they don't go the free agency route too. I hope they grab the bull by the horns and that they take kind of destiny into their own, they want to take control of their own destiny and kind of go out there, get the man you want. You'll have an abundance of assets. You overpay for players in free agency. I do not like free agency for the most part. I really don't like, especially day one, day two shopping of free agency. So I really hope the Flyers, and I like what you said there, Charlie, because we do talk about that, how, you don't just say, oh, we'll be good in 5 years, right? You kind of evaluate it. If Mitchkov changes the game, you adjust, right? If Tippett changes the game, you adjust depending on, kind of letting the players' development set your course and your level of aggression. So totally agree there. And you mentioned Mitchkov; it's a big part. We'll do the final segment here. So I'm pretty sure I heard you comment on this already, but I brought it up a few times so far here. Seems to me like the Habs have problems. At least their fans. They seem to have
Oh
some
yeah.
some sort of trauma. Um, and I don't know. I'm going to add this in there too. There does seem to be this weird feeling that I noticed that when the Flyers tend to draft a guy, there is kind of this like immediate, well, he's not that good statement that kind of comes in. I was almost kind of waiting for with Mitchkov. Everything about Mitchkov's development path, let's say it that way, because no players are guaranteed. We've seen this counter. I mean, there's a handful, McDavid, maybe Bedard, right? Like none of these guys are guarantees, right? We can name them on two hands probably over the past 10 years of players who are guaranteed. But everything he has done in his career, playing against men for the past 2.5 years already, beating Ivan Demidov in that pace. I'm not putting down Demidov. We both really like him. I think all three of us would have been very happy with the Flyers getting him. We would all be high on him. What do you think is going on with Habs fans kind of not just defending their player, which I'd have no real problem with, and being like, oh, I like Mitchkov, but I like Demidov more, but this whole diminishing the Mitchkov potential. And even the Flyers, when we picked York over Caulfield, nobody went and diminished Caulfield here. If anything, it was maybe the opposite with York just putting him down immediately. I made a video about that, about, kind of give it time. They're apples and oranges players, and we'll allow time. But I never put down Caulfield. You have to be crazy to think Caulfield will be bad. And that's kind of how I see people reacting, ironically, Habs fans, to putting down Mitchkov. How do you kind of see their mentality playing out? Like, where does that really come from? And do you think they have any points when they diminish Mitchkov? Because I really like Demidov, but when I see he's playing in the MHL and they keep telling me he's a great two-way player, I'm like, yeah, but he's doing it in a lower juniors league than what majority of these players do. And Michkov, when you're watching him, he's playing against men. So there's a very different level of aggression and decision making made, and also size and strength played. So it's like you can't really just stare at highlights or even game footage and make that prediction. So what do you kind of think about that situation?
So I think there are two main reasons why Montreal fans have kind of gone completely off the deep end in terms of the way they talk, not about their prospect, for your fans. You should be very high on most of your prospects, I would hope.
Yeah.
But how low they are on Mitchell. The first one is a rational reason. The second one is not.
Okay.
So the first one, I think, truthfully, is because what you need to, and I think Flyers fans know this to a degree, but maybe not quite as much as they would if they were Habs fans, of course. The Habs themselves, like I'm talking about the Montreal Canadiens franchise, they went on a blitz, and it wasn't like they straight up said it, but they leaked it through very friendly channels in the weeks after the draft because they saw the backlash of like, how could you not take Mitchkov? That was insane that you passed on him. They leaked through a lot of people basically that they don't think Mitchkov is that good. So that idea, it was basically incepted into Habs fans from the Habs. The Habs got their people out there saying that Mitchkov is a piece of shit, that he's not good in a team environment, that he's too small, that he doesn't care about defense. They were leaking it through their preferred channels to get their narrative, their preferred narrative out there to take some of the heat off of the organization for passing on Mitchkov because they knew how angry the fans were. I think while not all of that stuck, I think some of it did. And when you're hearing it from, otherwise trustworthy sources saying like, well, sources tell me Matvei Mitchkov is a jerk, like it gets stuck in your head. And now they have that in their heads that all these things, all these negative stories they heard about Mitchkov that no one else really did, because this mostly was limited to the Montreal fan ecosystem, because that's what the Montreal organization was trying to get. They were trying to reach Montreal fans and tell them, don't worry, we know Mitchkov better than anyone, and we know that he's not going to be the superstar that you're afraid he's going to be. So I think that's number one. I do think that part of it is the PR blitz that Montreal was able to get out there through back channels, denigrating Mitchkov. That's number one. Number two is the irrational one, and I think this probably is really what's going on here at its core.
Okay.
I think it's a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
I think that deep down, they all really want Mitchkov. They wanted Mitchkov on draft day. They couldn't get him. And then it became a classic example of, well, you can't break up with me. I'm breaking up with you first. Actually, you're not even that hot. Like, I really do think like that is what it is. It's that they all wanted him so bad. And even though it was their organization that rejected Mitchkov, not the other way around, there is still a feeling of him being like the one who got away. So it makes them feel better if they tell themselves that actually he's not that good, because it allows them to ignore the very real possibility that he is that good and they passed on him for a decent second pair defenseman.
Yeah, I think it's because too, Charlie, like let's tear this guy down in Mitchkov, for example, to make ourselves feel better as fans that, the team that we cheer for unfortunately did not draft Mitchkov. So us shitting on him, us tearing, him down is like an ability to essentially create a coping mechanism, as you were stating. So I think that makes a ton of sense, at least from my perspective. Another thing too, at least with the Mitchkov Demidov situation that is kind of crazy to me is like, if you think about Mitchkov, you think about Demidov, they're both really good friends. So just to pit both of them against each other, I think it's just an unfair thing. Because usually when you're thinking about two players that are rivals, it's because, they might not dislike each other or what may have you. But at least with this situation, these guys probably, grew up in that, prospect system in Russia, know each other quite well. So it is just a weird situation in general to have two players like that pitted against each other. And then the PR machine that is Canadian hockey media, media in Montreal, them putting these things out there about Michkov. I mean, that's all calculated, that's planned, right? Like they're trying to
Yes.
do that to obviously reinforce the pick that they made in David Reinbacher versus passing on a Michkov. So these are all, I think, factors in general that probably like contribute to Habs fans' ideas and their thoughts on the situation. Also, maybe Danny Briere being a French Canadian and being the GM of the Flyers and not being the GM of the Habs because they love their French Canadian GMs as well. That could be a factor too. But a little bit of FOMO maybe for them on the Michkov situation, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. You look at what the Flyers ended up leaving with that draft and then grabbing Oliver Bonk as well, which, quite frankly, at least on the surface level, I don't know Reinbacher that well, but it does seem to be a comparable type of defenseman, playing similar roles. So, you figure you took that guy pretty high in the draft, and the Flyers managed to grab not only the better prospect realistically, in my opinion, but then also a subsequently similar prospect to what you took very high to pass on Michkov. Now we had our own experience that this year with Zeev Boyum, right? And I was very high on Zeev Boyum. I'm high on both of them, to be honest with you, Luchenko and Boyum, but I did really like Boyum. I mean, I'm Israeli. He's an Israeli hockey player. I was like, this is amazing. I was like, I almost knew it wasn't going to happen. Even, I like expected a trade when he dropped. And, but it's very rare to see an organization put a player down. Like I even look at Cutter Gauthier and we kind of came up with a nickname here. We call him like Little Willie G at this point. But I don't deny the fact that he is a very good prospect. Like I do expect him to be a top Calder trophy, especially being 20 years old. I do expect him to have a great performance. And you don't see the Flyers diminishing his talent. Now you did see Danny Briere labeling him as a winger and not a center,
Yeah.
which is a strategic move. But to flat out diminish the value of a player, and then when I heard Grant McCagg say what he said publicly, and again, if you're listening to this, do not bash the guy. This just we can reference his stuff without being mean to him. But the way he just put down Michkov and saying he hope I've never even heard anybody say anything like that where I hope he has a bad season so I don't have to
Yeah, it's
hear about it
bizarre.
online.
Very bizarre.
Maybe just a toxic fan base a little bit. Maybe more toxic than Philly, which is saying a lot. I don't know. What do you think about that, Charlie?
Yeah, I don't know. Look, I think, and I talked about this on PHLY Flyers, I think last week when we broke all this down, that Philadelphia fans, not really Flyers fans, it's Philadelphia fans in general.
Yeah.
We have a tendency in these types of situations to blame our team and not blame the player.
Makes
And
sense.
I honestly think that is probably the more rational, healthy way to do it.
Yeah.
Like the comparison I made as a diehard Eagles fan was when the Eagles passed on Earl Thomas and instead picked Brandon Graham.
Yeah.
And Brandon Graham ultimately was an integral part of the Eagles winning the Super Bowl. But like the entire, like however many years it was in between the pick and that play, Eagles fans constantly ripped the Eagles front office for daring to think Brandon Graham was better than Earl Thomas, like one of the best safeties of the era. Now it's all okay because Brandon Graham forced the fumble and boom, like, okay, everything's good. But like Philadelphia fans in general don't let their front offices off the hook. They like
Right.
You made the comparison with Cole Caulfield and Cam York. It's not like Flyers fans were ripping on Cole Caulfield. They were ripping on Chuck Fletcher for not taking Cole Caulfield instead taking Cam York. That was the difference where, to me, if the Flyers were in that position, the position the Habs were in, and they took Reinbacher instead of Michkov, I don't think Flyers fans would be ripping on Michkov. They would be calling for whichever GM passed on Michkov to be let out onto the stockade.
Yeah, that's a great point to make. Definitely focus on maybe what you can control versus the uncontrollable in that sense.
Yeah.
It's also weird to attack 19-year-old kids, 18-year-old
That has
kids.
definitely not a great look.
All right, that was a great answer. Charlie, we had you here for a little bit over the time we said, so we'll let you go on this one. But thank you again so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And anything you want to let our audience know about? I know you're always releasing articles. You mentioned the Farabee article. And again, Charlie does do a pretty much daily, but during the regular week podcast with Bill Matz. And I know Kelly's on there as well. Kelly Hinkle. She's on from time to time. So make sure to check out their podcast on PHLY on their YouTube channel. They got other sports coverage too. So make sure to check that out. Anything else you want to let our audience know about?
Yeah, I would just say, if you haven't checked us out at PHLY, we obviously launched last September. Did we do our show Mondays through Fridays during the off season, 5 days a week during the season? Right now, we're doing it at 1 p.m. every day, so check us out live on YouTube. And then, of course, I still publish my articles at allphly.com. Some of them are free. The more in-depth, deep dive stories are behind our paywall. You have to be a PHLY diehard member to read those. But not only do you get me, you also get all of our other writers. You get Zach Berman and Bo Wolf on the Eagles. You get Derek Bodner and Kyle Neubeck on the Sixers. We have an exceptional stable of writers. We have Les Bowen contributes, Jim Salisbury contributes, all for diehards only. So check that out if you're interested in quality written content about every single Philadelphia sports team, including your Philadelphia Flyers.
Awesome. All right. Thanks again, man. Really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks.
Of course.
Charlie.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So we had a great conversation with Charlie. Really happy we could get him on. Obviously, it's a slow period of time. Vasili did a great job reaching out to Charlie and getting him on the show. It's nice to see us intermix. And it's kind of the nice part of the off season. People's schedules are definitely more open. Our schedules, at least at nighttime, right? Typically with Flyers games, it's a lot harder to get these in. So I'm glad we were able to have Charlie on because, if you're not following Charlie O'Connor online, I'll say this pretty confidently. Like he arguably is the best like journalist for Flyers. At least he's one of them. I mean, Bill Meltzer's the golden god
Yeah.
in my mind. He's timeless for me, and I'll listen to him forever. But Charlie's done a great job, kind of. He's at every Flyers event. Like the guy works his ass off. So
Yeah, Charlie does an amazing job covering the team in all
yeah.
aspects and just really puts his best foot forward in terms of everything he does that's Flyers related. So if you aren't following him or don't somehow know who he is and you're a fan of his team, first of all, I don't know how that would be possible, but
Yeah.
definitely go follow Charlie and what they're all doing there at PHLY because it's some really, really great coverage. And I actually do have a little bit of breaking news. It's not that high profile, but it's Flyers related, so it's interested. It's more on the charity side of things actually. But it's pretty cool for the Flyers to do this. And I didn't really know about it, but apparently there's a grand opening ceremony tomorrow from 4 to 8 p.m. and it's a new rink, the rink at New Hanover Community Park. So that's in New Hanover Township in Pennsylvania. So essentially, it's a donation from Flyers charities supporting the refurbishment of a ball hockey rink, and they installed new flooring and boards, built team benches, penalty boxes, and provided new hockey nets to the ball hockey rink there. So I just think, obviously, an amazing thing for the Flyers charities to kind of be a part of and support. And I just think in general, when you're trying to grow the game of hockey, having these rinks available to kids who want to play is the main thing, and it's the most important thing, right? Because if there's nowhere for you to go to play, how are you going to pick up the game and kind of fall in love with it, right? So getting that new ball hockey arena out there and the fact that Flyers were able to do that and help out, that's awesome. So I mean, if you have time tomorrow and you're around that area, go check out the rink at New Hanover Community Park and maybe get the ball hockey going.
Yeah. And I would imagine you're kind of spoiled with this being in Toronto and the support that hockey has in Canada.
There's a rink down every street. Not actually, but there's a lot of ball hockey rinks. It's ice hockey rinks, tons of infrastructure.
It's probably amazing. In Philly, we have some. Northeast has majority of them. They're not as popular. Like we have a local small foot hockey rink here that I was playing in that league for a while. The amount of people who'd come up to me just watching me carry sticks to go play is crazy. Like people are dying for it, and that rink is falling apart, and it's in Fishtown. So I think Flyers should fix that one up too, to be honest with you. And I wonder how many. I
Get
wonder
the
how.
hockey on the go. So
Yeah, no, it's all good. Has anybody ever asked them? It's kind of like, that's something Ed Snyder, again, Ed Snyder's program, the youth hockey, like they were all about that. I think the Flyers doing this is great, and I think they should do more of it. And it's the best way to get kids into hockey. Have the rink available to them to go play. Hockey's an expensive sport, but ball hockey is a lot more affordable, and it's a great introduction into, especially if you're even starting with foot hockey, like just understanding the rules of the game, understanding how to stick handle, how to shoot with the ball. It's a great way to get kids into the game, and we need more of that in hockey. It is growing. It's definitely a growing sport, and I've proven that on this podcast. It's growing globally, but we need it to grow in North America as
yeah.
well.
The more rinks, the better. I mean, like, think about anything in life, right? When you do something, it gives you the ability to understand it like more and understand what it's all about when you can kind of get in there and do it firsthand. So I think especially for growing the game with kids, like just having them play that, initial ball hockey game or something, you could, create fans for life or make people fall in love with the game, and
Yeah,
they never thought they would have ever been exposed to that. So it just
yeah,
takes one game of ball hockey, in my
yeah,
opinion.
and it's a lot cheaper to do ball hockey versus ice, and
Oh, considerably. And
because
then
the
you never know if you want to pursue that down the line. You realize that you like it and
right.
go from that point.
Because hockey's an expensive sport. It's a big barrier to entry versus like basketball or soccer, right?
Oh,
Or
yeah, it,
or
it can be
even
expensive.
football, which is more expensive than the other two because of similar to hockey, the equipment. But you just really need a football to learn how to play football. In hockey, you need a stick, a skates, you need a rink, you need
You
a
need a
net.
goalie.
Yeah, a goalie, which is the hardest thing to find. Oh my God, you'd be like the golden god here, Vasili, like a guy who wants to play goalie. Oh my God. You always make the joke that the person wants to play goalie, like there's something wrong with them, it's like nobody wants to be the goalie. Um,
Hey, the funny thing is, I always say to people is like, how would you want to get like pucks or balls like shot at you, and
right.
it doesn't actually hurt when you're in that equipment, so you're really not that crazy.
True. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you get out of having to skate laps during practice, so
All right.
it's
All right. Yeah.
there's a
So
couple
benefits.
benefits.
So kids, if you're listening, which I doubt we have many kids listening, but if you are listening, and you're not into hockey, though I don't know how because we're such a niche audience.
Yeah,
But
right.
pick up hockey. All right, let's get in. We have let's go over some of the stuff we talked about with Charlie, and then we have a couple topics. Um, so good conversation with Charlie. I really like what he said about Michkov and the Canadians. Like that battle's been going on online. I'm seeing people make videos of Michkov versus Demidov, and it's like there are other great Russian players out there. Like I don't know if
They're
people
just
are.
frustrated, Yariv,
Yeah,
is
it's
my
really
thought.
well, it's really weird to me, and I do believe this. There is like this negative tinge on the Flyers, which we are kind of used to it at this point. But like, why is there even a debate on Michkov? Like, that's what I don't understand. Nothing of his reputation, his actual reputation, not rumors, nothing about his actual reputation, his play on the ice. What is the question? And I brought he is the least risky pick the Flyers have made since
In
I'm
years, yeah.
since Peter Forsberg, which was a risky pick, which was considered a reach at the time. They didn't pick Eric Lindros. They took a guy that most people didn't think was going to be ranked that high in the prospect pool, and they took him at 7. And then they ended up taking Michkov at 7 this year, who dropped, right, for, in my opinion, complete political reasons, had nothing else to do outside of the influence of the war. And we saw that with Demidov this year, which it didn't have anything to do with the war. He went about kind of where he was ranked, which was around 4, to be honest. He was never really ranked at 2. Like people who ranked him at 2, it's because he kind of like made his way up because of his skill level. But if you looked at the players available, there were just it was defenseman heavy draft. It was it was a center heavy draft. And that's really why Michkov would drop at all, is because the other players, Fantilli and Carlson, were centermen, right? If Michkov was a centerman, I don't think he would have made it past 2, even with the reputation of Russian hockey players and whatnot. But there is this weird tinge where I feel like I have to defend Michkov, and it's very strange. Like, Why didn't Bedard didn't go through anything like this? And if you look
No, not at
at
all.
Michkov's reputation and Bedard, if Michkov was never excluded from the world tournaments and all this, he probably would have outscored Bedard once again. It's like it would have been no question. And it's just like, why do we have to defend a kid who is breaking records? It's so strange.
Yeah, and also defend a kid who hasn't even been in the NHL. Like typically most NHL fans aren't aware of these prospects unless it's like a knock the door down, I'm making the league into my rookie year type of situation where
Which he probably would have.
yeah, he probably would have. So I get why they know of him, but like just based on where he was drafted, like you don't typically see, for example, like other fan bases going crazy or like getting like huge backlash against them, like for a prospect like going number 7, right? Like you typically just do not see that. I just think it's the national media storm that kind of followed Michkov being drafted and the whole, political situation, everything like that. Like in the Canadian media, like being Canadian, I just remember around that time there were tons of stories, especially coming out of Montreal media surrounding Michkov and reasons and factors as to why Montreal didn't draft him because they had certain insight on the back, certain sources or certain insight concerning Michkov that maybe he wasn't a team player or there was some sort of attitude issue. So when you couple all that together, that's kind of the initial introduction that Canadian fans might remember, right? Because they see all this media hype surrounding him in a negative light. So they have these negative opinions surrounding him due to that. And it's kind of almost like an inception, right? Where like the media outlets kind of put forth this information almost to cover their asses in a sense and to cover the Canadians' asses maybe for like making a pick that they maybe should have not made in Reinbacher. I also just think for Reinbacher in general, like, and what happened with the Habs, like, I think Habs fans, it's more of like a FOMO in the sense that they probably realize that Michkov's a better prospect and Reinbacher is not. And they realize that they got the short end of the stick. So it's like Charlie said, he really put it perfectly. It's a coping mechanism for
Yeah.
not getting the player that you were actually wanting and hoping that your team would select.
But like,
So
I agree with you, and maybe it is the Canadian, and you would know better than me. Maybe it is Canadian media thing because
it
I don't
is,
see that
I'd say.
happening to Demidov. I don't see anybody diminishing Demidov. Oh, he wasn't able to make the KHL yet, or any of these bullshit excuses. Because the kid he looks very talented, and
Well, the Habs
he
didn't
seems like a
pass on
great
him, or
kid.
even if they did
Right.
pass on him, then you'd probably see these articles.
Imagine if Toronto passed on
Oh my God, that would be like, imagine if Toronto passed on Mitchkov, what
him.
the
Right.
narrative would have
Exactly.
been like, anything like that, right? Like when you have these huge teams with huge fan bases, they're trying to get this story out to almost justify the move that they made. It's like a self-justification in a sense. Like, let's put this information out to make us look better, to our fans who are kind of losing it and going crazy over why we did this or did that. So it's almost covering their asses in a little bit of a sense. And these teams always have, connection with the media to do stuff like that. So
If the
gotta
kid
put two
didn't
and two
have
together.
pneumonia, he would
Yeah.
hold a ridiculous. He already did break a bunch of records, and if he didn't have pneumonia, he would have broke Kaprizov's record
Of
too.
course, yeah.
And it's just like I look at this and I'm like I don't understand this.
They're just not looking at the actual statistical like output and like what he's doing. They're just taking all this attitude stuff and bad attitude, bad work ethic at like face value based
But
on the reports. So
but like I'm even seeing stuff where like I'm like where I'm seeing like, oh, he could be he projects to be a point per game player. No, he doesn't. He projects to be a 130-point player in the league. Like, if you look at the guys who are doing that type of stuff, he has the exact reputation. He has a better reputation than Yakupov, Filatov, all these guys who failed, Guryanov. None of them even came close to doing what he did at his
yeah.
age. So I do not understand this because, like, the guy statistically is on a generational pace and doing it with style. Playing against men as a 16-year-old. Like, I've never seen a prospect hit, like, silence the crowd and the crowd keeps going. And again, it's not everybody, obviously. It's probably in the minority, right? It's probably that 20%, but that there is a 20% of people talking this way. Like, imagine people did this to Bedard, who was
Yeah.
not perfect. He was phenomenal offensively. He's everything that he was listed to be offensively. I don't think he's McDavid level, but he's definitely at least Austin Matthews level, right? Like, maybe he can even be better than that. But the guy is clearly going to be one of the top producers in the league every year. Top five offensive contributor when he hits his prime, probably every year. I see that. He did not have a perfect season. You know what I mean? He's not great defensively. I hear Michkov's not good defensively, but Dart is not good defensively. So, like, why is it like it's never brought up with Bedard?
It's just turning a blind eye in a
He plays
sense. Like you
center.
want to, yeah, it's turning a blind eye. Like you want to focus on the negative about the individual you're already like preemptively like have those negative thoughts about because it's kind of intrinsically, in your head based off all the stuff that you've read and seen. Like I think for the Habs fans, they just want to believe that Michkov isn't as good as he really projects to be because it makes them feel better as fans of the Habs knowing that, hey, like our management probably fucked up on passing on him. We probably should have selected him at that spot, but doing it this way makes them feel better about it. At least that's that's the only way that I can understand it. So yeah,
I've never seen anything
very strange.
I've never seen anything like it, dude. I've never seen such a great prospect come in with so many question marks that have nothing to do with what he has shown.
You have to hope, at least for Michkov, like he seems to have a bit of a pulse on social media and what's happening.
Yes,
who knows if he's seen any of this stuff?
Great
But
point.
you never know if it might. Yeah,
He
probably.
has.
You never know if it might act as a chip on the shoulder. Like, let me just prove all these people wrong. I think for a young guy in general, like having that motivation, extra motivation, can always be a good thing. So
yeah, I'm excited to see Demidov loaned out from Ska after the beginning of the season, which for some reason Hab fans think that there's no chance of that happening.
that's probably going to happen though, based on our experiences with Mitchkov and Roman Rottenberg.
Mitchkov was playing against men prior to that and got loaned out. Demidov has never played against men, and I really like Demidov. I would love to have him here. He would easily be our second best prospect behind Mitchkov. So I would see him as a top line player potential in the league, like a star player. So I just don't get it. I've never seen anything like this before,
it's strange. It's bizarre.
Canadian media, it's probably
the
true.
Habs fans are just nuts in general.
They lost their goddamn minds, dude.
Yeah, just to focus on
at least the online ones.
Yeah, just to focus on a prospect so much that isn't even a prospect of your team at this point. Years out, it's been 2 years now. Like you just have to move on, right? Like it happened. It is what it is.
Like the worst thing I heard about Cutter Gauthier is that he's going to end up being another JVR. Okay, 70
that'd be pretty good for his career. I think.
Yeah, I was going to say that's not
right now. Like, yeah, if you told him right now you're going to make as much money as JVR has, I'm sure that he would be okay with that.
And I think he's going to be a better goal scorer than JVR. I think he has definite potential to be a 40 goal scorer in the league, but I have yet to see people like, and what he did was messed up in my opinion. And yet I don't see the hate on him that Michkov gets, which is, it's just strange to me. It's very strange to me. The other thing we talked about, which I want to go back to, is the players having breakouts. And I think he did a good job talking about Sam Ersson, and I think he brings up a lot of great points, and I do agree with him on the attitude around Ersson. I thought Charlie broke it down pretty well as the expectation with Ersson, and I agree with him. I think Ersson is already a good goalie, and being not overplayed will absolutely help, and we've talked about that. But I do think part of, like last season, you and we talked about the Flyers being a bubble playoff team the whole time. This time I'm a little more hesitant to. However, when I look at the ages of the players on here and I look at this offensive core, with Farabee and Frost and Tippett and Michkov and Bonk and Forster and TK and Paling, and I look at the ages of these players, right? And Cates, right? These guys we talk about all the time. They're right now like going to show hints of their prime, right? They're in
Flashes,
they're 24 years old. Some of them turning 25 or are 25. So they're right there. They're right on that cutoff line where 2026 looks like to be the prime age for a lot of these guys. There is a chance that, 100% of them do not need to take off this year for the Flyers to be a playoff team. If 50% of them
just half, yeah,
make a jump from their first year to their second year, this is another, at the very least, wild card team, right? And it's hard to say that because we don't have Carter Hart, right? And that's a huge loss. I mean, in my opinion and your opinion, and we both called him a top 10 goalie in this league with a good team in front of him. And now you have more of a question mark there. You lost Walker, but he was a question mark going into last season too. You were one of the only people I heard at all that thought that he had potential to be a good defenseman here. You're the only person maybe I really heard that from. Everybody else thought he was a complete throwaway. And no, it's serious, dude. You're the only person I heard, and you convinced me.
You can attribute that to me watching late night Kings games
right.
sometimes and just seeing him play. But
yeah,
if you watch these guys, that's how you figure. That's how you find out about them at the end of the day. But
yeah, but there were a ton of question marks, and you and I, and I made that Sanheim call where I was like, I thought he was going to be the biggest. Like I thought the fan base was going to completely change their tone on him, and they did. And, I look at it and I'm like, there are a lot of question marks, but if things break at a 35 to 50% improvement for, let's say, all of the guys that are ripe for it, this is another wild card team. Now the Flyers have kind of stayed out of this year and they're like, what will be, will be. And that's kind of what makes me think that, and with the division getting better, I think there's a chance that they might be just as good, but end up taking a step back. But there is also a chance that they're better than last year.
It's possible. You can't rule it out just based on the potential for all their young guys to get even better. So I think that's a great point to bring up. Like, I think goaltending for them to make the playoffs is going to be a huge factor. Like, if they're going to make it to the postseason, they're going to need to have solid performances, not just from Urson, but from Fedotov. He's going to need to be able to put together some good stretches, obviously, to support Urson because he can't play every game, as Charlie stated so eloquently when he was on with us. So I think they're going to at the very least, need to have league average goaltending between Urson and Fedotov. Like, I don't think they can have any
and
prolonged
Kolosov when he comes over.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think they can have any prolonged stretches of the performances that kind of Urson gave down the stretch last season where he was really running on fumes. On a game-to-game basis, he was really letting in a lot of, shots that you would expect him to save based on his talent level. And I think that he would have if he had the adequate rest. And also he was a rookie, so he was kind of just adjusting to being in that situation for the first time, being the, number one bona fide starter on an NHL team. That's a lot of pressure for a young goalie. So all these things factor in. Like, I do have the faith that they can provide league average goaltending. I think Urson isn't only going to surprise people, to be honest. I wouldn't be surprised to see Fedotov outplay Urson at points. I think people are really underestimating his abilities. Nice. He was the MVP for Russia at the Olympics last time they were, there. Not to say it's the best competition or anything, but to play on that high of a level and under that type of pressure, it just shows, the ability that he has. So I think Fedotov is really a guy that's being underestimated in terms of the goaltending. So I'm interested to see what kind of steps forward he takes as he embarks upon his NHL journey. And then just in terms of the guys that you mentioned, like, for example, right, let's say Tippett gets 35 goals next season. That's a considerable increase. Let's say, Frost scores 65 to 70 points. Let's say Farabee scores around 70 points. Let's say Bobby Brink has a 20-goal season. You factor all that in, plus adding Michkov, all those extra points, extra goals. Like, how many more games does this team win, compared to last season, right? So not to say that that's all going to happen or that's a guarantee, but there is a reality or there is a scenario where those things and those, aspects I mentioned do break that way for the Flyers and for those players. So you can't really rule that out. There's also another situation where that doesn't happen and, they all underperform. So you have to look at both sides of the coin, but I think it's definitely something that isn't being mentioned enough, that a lot of these guys are really entering those prime years. So who knows how they're going to progress from here after another year of experience under their belt. Because as we see, right, comfortability is a huge thing with young players. The more comfortable they get, usually the more they can produce and be themselves out there on the ice. So
Yeah.
I'm interested to see how their skill sets all develop. Really, next season's going to be another huge evaluation year for a lot of these young
Yeah,
guys.
I like what you said too, because like the leadership didn't remove really anybody from the team. So like they did give them a vote of confidence, going into this season. They didn't go out there like, no, you're our guys. Fans online, some fans online don't like that, but they're like, you're our guys. We believe in you. And then, you combine that with the Torts factor and Shaw factor. And I want to give Thompson some credit here, but we haven't necessarily seen it yet. But with the coaching staff we've had, that has made the team progressively better since they got here, there's a good chance that this team will be. And again, they finished with 87 points, I think, last year because of the losing
Yeah.
streak. They really need 96 points to make the playoffs. That is not a crazy difference, right? So,
Yeah, if the power play is like 20th in the league, that's where those points could come from potentially.
right,
So
absolutely. I don't think they're that far away from it. All right, let's talk about the World Junior Summer Showcase. I wanted to bring up one thing. Really, I didn't really watch too much of it. I saw prospect highlights and whatnot, but I wasn't really watching the games. But Stephen Ellis, who
great guy. Yeah, I worked with him at
yeah,
Daily Faceoff.
yeah, exactly, Daily Face Off, and he does a lot of prospect work in general. But he had day 5 of the tournament standouts. And the reason I want to talk about it, he had 2 flyers listed on there, guys that he didn't have high on his list, but this summer showcase seemed to kind of spark his interest. He wrote some really nice stuff about them. You can find the link to that on his Twitter handle and one of his recent posts. But he did have Carson Bjarnason, the number 1 standout player. Bjarnason had a fantastic performance, came in relief due to give up 1 goal to Iserman, but really just stood on his head, and probably the best performance we've seen from him at that level, which is actually really exciting. It almost makes me feel like playing with the Flyers coaching staff, which is what you hope for, has kind of helped him improve his game. We really only see him playing for Brandon, which has been a very bad team. His consistency has been an issue, even though he's had standout moments, but it does get me really excited. And then he had Jet Luchenko on there. And he had a really nice write up. He had Luchenko at 18. But and I saw somebody put up those, like, I forget the analytics site, but they're always online, and he was comparing like Zeev Boyum to Luchenko, and he's like, I don't understand this. And if you look at the projection, and I'm like, yeah, but Zeev Boyum is 9 months older than Jet Luchenko,
Yeah.
and like that is huge. And I think the fact that Luchenko stood out that much playing against older players, because again, at this age, at that 17, 18-year-old, because I think Luchenko is still 17 for a few more or 3 more weeks here, or 2 more weeks here. Um, like that's a huge amount of development time. I'm really excited to see how Luchenko kind of changes the narrative for both of these guys, because Bjarnason's kind of like an afterthought right now as a prospect for a lot of people, because he didn't take a huge jump in his development, but he's a goalie, right? It's going to take like 7 years anyway. But I'm really excited to see like a guy like Luchenko, who played a 4th line role for Team Canada, like what's going to happen, not this year, but next year coming in his summer showcase. Is he going to be a top 6 forward? Because I would almost like his game does kind of lean towards being used in a more defensive role, just like Sean Couturier was in his upcoming. Like like even when he played for like national teams, like when he played for the Young Stars team, he was playing a 4th line role, right? 4th line shutdown center role. But that's because he was elite at that position. Luchenko just seems like a guy, like the more I see him, the more you look at the way he just plays in all aspects of the game, the way, and they had that highlight of him kind of flying by his man for a breakaway. As he begins to put more and more of his tools together, I would not be shocked if we look back at this draft and be like, man, the Flyers made the right pick here. Not that Zeev Boyum is bad, but the Flyers hit on Jet Luchenko, and we talked about that. It's all about hitting on your picks, not taking the guy who is ranked higher. Because all kinds of guys get ranked everywhere. We went, if you guys did not watch that episode, go back and watch our episode where we rank, what was it, 3 weeks ago now?
Yeah.
We went through all of the drafts the last 14 years. Your rankings don't mean shit. I promise you, they don't. They're irrelevant. And this whole you have to draft at the top of the draft to get elite players is absolutely not true.
No,
And
it's not the case.
at all.
Sometimes you really just have to assess in terms of the skill set that might fit your system and what you need primarily. Like it looks like the Flyers obviously realized they needed centers, and Luchenko was there, and the skill set the skill set they saw from him, and where they were and where they had him on his board, it just made sense for them to select him. Also, trade back another asset. But yeah, in terms of the World Junior Summer Showcase, like there was a ton of Flyers at this tournament or whatever you want to call it, and they all had really nice performances. Like Carson Bjarnason, it's great to see him kind of end the tournament in the fashion that he did. Made 21 saves, like you said, came in cold to a 3-1 game. Like first of all, coming in cold to like a game against the US, which is your major rival if you're Canada, and performing that way, like that's a tough thing to do for a goalie, right? You're already down the game. Essentially, you have to give up 0 goals or barely any for your team to stay in, and that's what he did. Only gave one up to Cole Yzerman. So shout out to Bjarnason for putting together a really good performance. Was really lights out there. Denver Barkey had a goal as well in that game. Jet Lachenko had a tap-in goal that was set up on the power play where I forgot who the defenseman was. It might have been Zane Parekh, but he kind of did like a wind-up slap shot and like did a fake slap pass to Lachenko by the net, and he had the wherewithal to tip that in. So that was some good stuff to see from him. Aside from that like breakaway chance that was all over social media where he kind of zipped by the opposing defender and really created a chance out of nothing just due to his speed. But man, like seeing that clip, like can the kid fly, right? Like the skating prowess is definitely evident. Some other, things that were really great at that showcase. Heikki Ruohonen,
Right.
he was the 1C for Finland for pretty much the whole summer showcase or
Yeah.
majority of it,
Saw
and
that.
that's something that's really good to see. I mean, I don't think that anybody really thought that he would be a 1C for them at a tournament like this, right? So just
Steve
to
did.
see that,
Steve
yeah,
Corianos,
Steve definitely did.
he called that out a while ago.
But just to see the fact that Finland, their national team also holds them in that same regard, it kind of shows that there might be a diamond in the rough situation here
Yeah.
pending, and the Flyers might have found another kind of late round steal. But we'll have to keep eyes out on Ruohonen, but he was really, really good. Jack Berglund, I saw scored a goal as well.
Yep.
In the tournament, it was net front, so he also had a pretty good performance, and he was playing a top 6 role. And even Ilya Pautov had a pair of goals as well
Mhm.
at the summer showcase. So just a lot of Flyers players and Flyers prospects in general. Like as far as the scoring for Flyers prospects, like Ruohonen had 3 assists in 4 games, and essentially was on the top line for the whole showcase. But yeah, like in general, a lot of Flyers players did well. Even Noah Powell looks like he, based on his showing, is a guy that could be a dark horse for the World Junior team for the U.S. coming up in December. So I think we're going to see a lot of these Flyers prospects, at least specifically from this draft, probably be factors at the World Juniors coming up in December. And that's really what you want to see if you're a team drafting these prospects, because these tournaments are huge for development. And it's not really just the tournament in general, but I think it's just the focus on the tournament. Like there's so many people watching, so many eyes on it. There's a lot of pressure on these players. If you could perform in a pressure situation like this, it really can kind of indicate that you have what it takes to perform at that NHL level when that pressure's on you as well. So it's not just the skill, but it's can you perform in these pressure situations when it really counts. So
Yeah, no, I think those were great additions, and we'll hear more about these players over the season. We're going to track them.
we'll have
Um,
Steve on and see what he thinks as well. Yeah.
Absolutely, we'll have Steve on to talk about these guys. We'll look for updates on all of them, but I think the negativity towards it, it's so funny, man. This off season, it's like the Flyers drafted poorly and didn't do anything in free agency, bad off season, and
All
it's
their
like,
draft picks are looking real good at the World
yeah,
Junior
like
Summer Showcase. So
I'm so sick of people like like I have
You got to actually
learned.
watch these kids play,
Well,
right?
I've
Like
learned so often to. I used to get so ramped up into all these prospect rankings and all this stuff. And after you start seeing them year after year just be so inaccurate, and we're going to talk about PTOs, and there's some names on there of like guys who were taken high, that didn't end up manifesting into that. And these people were sure that these were and it's just like, enough. Not there's almost it's such a crapshoot into getting this stuff accurate that like you really can't judge a team's draft. I mean, you can, but it's very difficult to get a real good gauge on a draft early on. There are
three
so many
years out.
drafts where I thought the Flyers hit home runs. The 2017 draft, when that draft was over, I was like, Flyers knocked it out of the park. I was like the Morgan Frost pick, the Nolan Patrick pick, the Isaac Ratcliffe pick, and look at that draft now.
In
Morgan
hindsight,
Frost is
yeah.
the only player of those three that are on this team and has any NHL value. And
Yeah.
and yeah, bad luck with Patrick and his injuries. I still believe he'd be a top six forward in the league if that didn't happen. But look at Isaac Ratcliffe, who I was high on. It was high on lots of people's lists. He was slated to be a first round pick.
It's just
You,
too early, Yariv. I
yeah,
think that's the thing to understand here with the draft and the rankings. Like
just way too
you
early.
can you can project all you want, but these are young players that, really the bulk of their development is coming after the draft. Those are the crucial development seasons,
Yeah,
right? Like obviously you develop to that point, but 19, 20, 21, 22, those are crucial development years. And those are really going to indicate how a player is going to turn out at the NHL level, not what he did pre-draft typically, right? So
right.
I think 3 years out is usually a safe bet to look at a draft and say, okay, this is what kind of a team might have hit with and might have missed on. I just think what it is it's the draft's so hyped all the time, every year. Everybody just wants to give that hot take and kind of, put their insight out there right away. And then 3 years down the line, if they were right, they look really good. But if they were wrong, nobody ever brings it up again. So
Right.
that's the way I look at it.
Yeah. So speaking of that, let's explore this PTO conversation. We wanted to have this for a couple weeks already, pushed it out. Now other people are talking about it. So we would have had it first, but I wanted to explore the PTO, even though it's way too early for this. But Oliver Shillington just signed a contract, a $1 million deal with Colorado, which I think was a nice risk for them to take, right? A playoff team that's hunting, hoping that they can get something out of a high pick that never really materialized. Had one good season, but it kind of found his way out of Calgary and now going to a playoff contender, probably trying to revitalize his career. And I think when you look at PTOs and you look at the Flyers roster, and we were talking about this before recording, there really is no room. The reality is there's no room on this roster. Now, there might be people to beat out on the roster. I wouldn't say the Flyers should ignore it completely. And PTOs are pretty risk free because you're not giving a guy a contract. You're just inviting them to a camp to fight for a spot. And even if they have a good camp, you might not sign them anyway because you have a guy that you just believe in more, and that might be younger or has a higher upside or whatever, and they'll stick with the team. But it does give that player opportunity to get noticed, and they end up getting signed other places because teams notice or they get a good review from the team that had them at PTO, right? So it is an opportunity to create opportunities for these players. And I do think the Flyers should explore this. Now, one guy I was looking at that's kind of fallen off, he wasn't necessarily a high pick, but he was a player of high interest because he was a high second or a mid-tier second round pick, Kalen Addison, who had a large drop off. He was a minus 35 this past year with 1 goal, 16 assists in 72 games. On the surface level, that stinks. But again, he's only 24 years old. And prior to that, in Minnesota, he had a 29-point season in 62 games. For in the AHL, he had in the previous year had 34 points in 43 games. And then the year before that, he had 22 points in 31 games. In Minnesota, he had pretty promising career, and a lot of Flyer fans were high on him. So I look at him, I go 24 years old. He's in our age group. He's a right-handed defenseman with offensive abilities. He's not big. He's 5'11", right? So he's not a big dude, but he's not necessarily like small, right? He's in that Cam York type size. And I do look at that as like, is this an opportunity for a guy like Addison, who, quite frankly, the Phantoms still need another defenseman, in my opinion. They're set at the forward, but there's still, this organization actually is short one defenseman. Most people might not really be aware of that. The Flyers might have some plans for that, but at the lower level, if you include Ronnie Attard, they are just 7 defensemen deep at the minor league level. Ethan Sansom probably being ranked number 7 right now. And 7's not bad, but you really want to go in with 8 just because of injuries and whatnot. I don't know if he'd be open to a two-way contract, but a guy like Kalen Adson on defense would intrigue me as far as a PTO, not a guaranteed contract, but guy with some promise. You look at Brad Shaw, you look at the way we've kind of been revitalizing defensemen. What do you think about a guy like that who's not very old? Again, he's 24 years old.
I was always a fan of Addison and his game. Like he's definitely a more offensive style defenseman, so you have to bear that in mind. Like he's never going to be that shutdown guy for you. But I think it really just depends on how they project, at least for the Flyers, some of their younger defensemen. Like if you plan on graduating Emile Andre at some point this season, where does Addison really fit in, right? Maybe in the AHL if he can accept that contract. So
That's
that's
what I'm
one way.
thinking.
That's one way to look at it. Or is he a guy that you think to yourself, hey, maybe Andre isn't panning out like we thought? Let's take a shot on an Addison to see if he can be like a replacement for a guy like an Andre. And I don't think that's the case at all, but you just never know what the team's thinking internally with their own assessments. So it's something I just wanted to mention. But Addison's really interesting. He's a good skater from what I've seen of him. Like I saw him play quite a bit with Minnesota this season that he had 62 games under his belt. I think that was 2022-23 season. And he looked pretty good. Like to put up 29 points in the league, basically almost your rookie season. Like that's not anything to balk at. So
Right.
I think the talent's there, but maybe just a little bit of regression. And it definitely doesn't help to, be on the San Jose Sharks. Not to say that
Right.
like
Right.
not to say that it's great. It's always great to have ice time, and I'm sure he played a ton. But like being on a team that's that bad can be sometimes detrimental for a younger player in their
And you get
development. So
exposed being an offensive defenseman.
exactly. So maybe he just needs a bit of a change of scenery, but I think that's definitely something that the Flyers should explore. I mean, they are tight to the cap, so I'm interested to see like if they do, what kind of maneuvering they would do to kind of get a guy like that. If they wanted to place him on the NHL roster, obviously we're thinking of him more as an AHL guy to
Yeah.
begin.
That's
But
how
who
I'm thinking of it.
knows? But who knows? There's a couple other guys on this list that are interesting. Like you see JVR on here. Um,
Yeah.
who knows if he's going to get a PTO anywhere?
Not from us,
Um,
but I would imagine he will get a PTO.
yeah, you think I'm surprised he just hasn't gotten signed or the Bruins haven't signed him back because I thought he played decently for them, but I guess at
Want to
his
get
age and
younger.
what he
Yeah.
brings, yeah, they might want to move on from somebody like that. I mean, there's a couple other interesting ones. Is
Yeah.
Zadina on this list or?
He's not on the list, which is really weird. I don't know why. Because he hasn't signed anywhere, but he's not on the list I sent you for whatever reason. This list is like not it's Puckpedia. They got to do a little bit better job updating this list. I'll say that.
But that's all
Um,
good. Yeah, like Philip Zadina was another one I wanted to mention. Like he was a high pick in his own right. I believe, yeah, I have 6 overall in 2018, still only 24.
Joel
I mean,
Farabee's
now,
draft.
yeah, exactly. Now, I mean, it'll be his third team he would join, and he really has never put up more than 24 points in the league or score more than 13 goals. So I don't know how many teams are going to really want to give him a shot at this point. It might be attitude related, I think, from a lot of things that I've seen. But hey, like if you're looking for scoring depth and you think that there's something in him or something that you've seen in his skill set that you could unlock and you're the Flyers, maybe they would, be of interest. But I just think with like the way the roster's shaping up, you don't even know how Deloria is going to get into
Yeah,
the lineup with Bobby Brink there. Like, I just don't see the Flyers
he
being interested in
it would
Zadina,
be
but
another AHL.
yeah, other teams might have interest, right? Like
Yeah,
if they're strapped for offense,
I
maybe they think it's a reclamation type of
he's
situation.
I think he's Czech, right?
Yeah, he's Czech. I could see him going back to the Czech league.
Yeah,
That's definitely a
or playing in the
possibility.
KHL, which some players are already jumping on that. Um,
Yeah.
and then there's Kyler Yamamoto, and this is a really interesting one because he's a former first round pick. You know,
Mhm.
he's also young. Um, he's 25, but he did have NHL success. I mean, he put up 40 points in his third year in the NHL, 40 points,
That's
20
with
goals.
Edmonton?
Yeah, with Edmonton. And then he had a season where he put up 26 points in 27 games with Edmonton. Um, I'm sorry, that wasn't his rookie year. That his rookie year, he had 26 points in 27 games. He didn't play a
Yeah.
whole season, but very good numbers. You know, you would think he'd be
Well,
taking off and never really took off as a player. And then this year only had 16 points in 59 games. He's a high skill player, but severely undersized. I think he's 5'7",
yeah, he's 5'8",
5'8",
100
5'8".
weights listed 153 pounds. He's still
Yeah.
fairly young though at 25 years old, was a first round pick. I can't explain to you some of the production there that looked good. Like that 20 goal year, like he was playing primarily with McDavid, so I mean obviously that explains it
Yeah.
all, but that's obviously going to help him.
It's a pretty big explanation.
And then they took him away from McDavid the following season and tried to have him be like that second line support, and he really wasn't scoring that much.
Sure.
And then
Yeah.
they traded him and tried to upgrade. So who knows? He did have a bit of a like he got some considerable ice time with Seattle and didn't really like light the world on fire. So I'm interested to see like where it goes or if he gets a contract. But maybe like one of the bottom tier teams kind of takes a chance on him, hoping he can kind of turn things around. Um, One other guy on the list too that's interesting to me, like I have to look his stats up from last season because I just am not aware of what he did on the Hab. But Tanner Pearson, right? Like he was always thought of as a
Hmm.
bit of a goal scorer. He's
I didn't
on
realize the
there.
UFA.
Yeah, he's on there as well. I just
I
want to
was
search his stats up and see like what was going on with him because really like he is 31 years old, so he's kind of getting near the tail end of the career. And I mean, to be fair, like he's had a lot of injuries. Like in 2022, he only played
probably it.
14 games. With the Habs last year, 54 games, he only had 5 goals and was a -12. So the production hasn't looked too great. I mean, since he's probably been in Vancouver back in 2019. So he's fallen off quite a bit, but typically teams usually give guys like this, like former cup winner, he scored 20 goals multiple times in the league, usually give guys like this chances. So I'm interested to see if he gets a PTO anywhere. I doubt it would be with the Flyers or they would really have interest just based on his age and kind of what he's bringing to the table. Personally, I think if the Flyers have any PTOs, it's going to be either like high upside younger players that are
Right.
reclamation projects or like
Yeah.
fourth line, like penalty kill type guys,
So
like tougher guys.
so the guy that I was looking at, and this is the guy I'm actually surprised that his career fell off so much. It's Kevin LeBlanc. Now he's not a big dude, but he did have a good career with San Jose,
Yeah,
playing in
for
a
sure.
bottom six role. And you know what his best season was in 18-19. He had 17 goals, 39 assists, 56 points in 82 games. And then to watch him, you know, he dropped off the following year with San Jose, or I'm sorry, he dropped off the following year with San Jose. He had 33 points in 70 games. And then every year he's kind of dropped off a little bit more. Maybe there's some injury problems there, but he's been a pretty consistent. Like he has one, two, three, like pretty much all 30-point paces, except for this past year where he put up 9 points in 46 games. So I imagine there's some injury problems there. But still a player that like seems like a serviceable bottom six forward, you know, at least fourth line role guy who has scoring upside. And I'm shocked because he was making 4.7 million and he's 28, right? He's still in
Yeah,
his
really in
prime.
his prime.
So he's the guy I would be interested. And again, no real spot for him in our lineup. But again, just to have him here as a PTO, I doubt he's coming. I would imagine he'd probably get a PTO with a West Coast team, considering he's been living in San Jose all these years. But that's a guy I could see getting a PTO.
I could see
Um,
Colorado jumping all over
right.
him. That seems like a type of pickup they would make, but I would assume he
Imagine
gets a
getting like guy.
PTO.
Imagine getting a 40-point player for nothing.
Yeah, I assume he'll get a PTO somewhere. Like usually that's stuff in that news kind of trickles out like last week of August, first week of September as these training camps start to ramp up. So I would expect he'll be one of the guys. Just to kind of end off, like I feel like Oliver Kylington, like that is a bit of a sneaky good pickup for.
Shillington.
Oh, is it Shillington?
It's
Okay.
Shillington. Yeah, he just
Oh
spells it. It's
wow. Oh my God.
awful.
Okay. I
Yeah.
didn't realize that. How could you
Yeah.
even figure that out? Anyway,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
Oliver Shillington, like I think that was a sneaky good pickup for the Avs. Because if you look at it, like I watched him play quite a bit with Calgary, and I thought he was like top four upside, and he had a really bad injury. He had 31 points in like 73 games with the Flames in 2021-22. I just think like he could get plugged into that top four for the Abs and probably not miss a beat. And I mean,
Or at
if I was
least
another team,
swingman 7 that you could plug
yeah,
in, you know.
but he's still fairly young. Like he's only 27, and he really hasn't played that much in the
Connect
NHL.
draft.
Yeah, still
Yeah.
fairly young. So I'm interested to see how he kind of plays with Colorado. It seems like they're always that team that just like finds these players that everybody seems to not want, and then they come on the Avs and end up being like a steal for them. So I wouldn't be surprised if the same happens with the
Yeah.
Shillington.
Yeah, there are still spots up for grabs. And this is where, there are rumors of the NHL adding 2 more teams to the NHL, and people say there's not enough talent in the league for that. I do not agree at all, actually. I think that you're watching players that are capable of playing in the NHL go to other leagues. Now, it
Yeah.
doesn't mean those teams would be awesome, but the game is growing and there are more great players being drafted like every year. Um, and there's a lot of players who are borderline NHL players or are NHL players that can't make the NHL. So while I would potentially wash it down a little bit for the first year or so, I think it would adjust. I don't really want the league to go to 34 teams. I'm not in favor of it, but I do think there is room for that. And
Yeah.
I think I think there will be a bunch of PTOs this year, and
It's a
they're
huge revenue builder, right? Like when you add
right.
these teams, think about the buy-in. So that's the kind of motivation for the NHL. I also think too, like, and this is just for me playing hockey growing up all my life. Like, I just totally believe that there's so many players that get overlooked for whatever reason at the AHL level specifically, where
Yeah.
like these guys could really play in the NHL, but they just never get that extended look and get comfortable and really get to show their skills. So I think there are a considerable amount of players probably at the AHL level, like not in every farm system, but I think there's a handful of guys that could be in the NHL and actually be pretty solid contributors, but they just never get that look, or something happens and they get hurt at the wrong time. Like sometimes it could be luck of the draw for some of these guys that are really on the bubble.
Yeah, and a guy who just got a 2-way contract, Alex Nylander, to go play in the same organization as his brother. Like
Yeah, which is fun.
well, it's kind of weird that he had 11 goals in 28 games and then couldn't find an NHL opportunity. I assume he just wanted to go to an organization he liked, but you
Maybe,
know,
or play with his brother, or like have some sort of backdoor handshake deal with it, like perform well in the AHL, and maybe we'll give you an NHL contract and you can
yeah,
play with your brother at some point. But I'd imagine for Nylander, like just for the fact that he's been on so many teams such a short span, like there has to be something maybe attitude related, like
yeah.
or else why would he be jumping around so
It
often, right?
has to be. I mean, Tony DeAngelo is still a free agent, and
I think he might be. I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't get any interest, but we'll
yeah,
see.
just because of what happened to him. And I saw Tony D actually down the. I told you this, but I saw Tony DeAngelo down the shore, we were at the same. It's like this very popular restaurant, and he came in with I believe was his family. Um, he was sitting at the table next to me. Obviously, I didn't bother the guy, but um, you know, he's still here in America. You got to figure he's looking for probably an NHL gig first, and if not, overseas is probably like he probably would do really well in the KHL. Honestly,
Likely PTO here. If he doesn't get a PTO, then maybe over to the K, right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, he'll get paid more probably in the KHL if he goes there, but he is kind
Some
of like
guys
a
don't want to go over there,
Well, I was
right?
gonna say he's a rah American guy, so I don't know how excited it would be to go over there. But there are other names like Chris Tierney is still out there, and man, there are a lot of guys that we watch getting older. Like Tanner Pearson, I didn't even realize with all their Nick
Yeah, I
Cousins.
saw that name and I was a little surprised. Cousins is out there, and that's surprising because I mean he just won a cup and
Yeah,
showed how effective he can be in that role. But he did do some pretty like greasy rat like things in the playoffs that maybe teams want to stay away from. But it didn't seem to
it's a guy you
hinder the
love on your
yeah.
team.
Exactly. It didn't seem to hinder the Panthers winning. So, I mean,
Yeah,
I think he'll probably get a PTO somewhere too. Probably a contender, like another team looking to like maybe they need that extra grit or something. Like I feel like if you're the Leafs, that's like a pickup you should go. I feel like Nick Cousins would be a pickup the Leafs should go for just with like think about their team. They want to get more playoff ready, like add that extra level of grit, that
yeah,
extra element.
yeah. All right, man. I think we're done with this episode. Anything you want to add?
No, it was a fun, really fun episode. Great to have Charlie join us. Fun
Yeah,
conversation with him. Make sure everybody check out PHLY for all the stuff that Charlie does. He kills it with all the writing and the daily shows. Just on my end, I did recently have an article breaking down Travis Konechny's contract. Did a little bit of a comparison between Brad Marchand's career to open up and Konechny's career, and surprisingly, Konechny actually in the first 7 seasons of his career compared to Marchand's outscored him. He had a 0.68 point per game. Marchand's 0.64. So check that article out on flyersnittygritty.com. You can kind of see the full breakdown of Travis Konechny's contract and the career comparison I made to Marchand. But yeah.
awesome. Awesome. Yeah, definitely make sure to check that out. That was a great article and a comparison I think that is people are very hesitant to give, but if you look you look at the facts, not your feelings about
The
connecting.
evidence is there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's on that projection. Okay, just want to remind everybody, please like and subscribe here on YouTube. Please subscribe, especially if you made it this far. It's a humongous help to us. And also hit the notification bell for notifications on when we release these episodes. Follow us on iTunes and Spotify for the audio version. And also give us a rating there as well. That's a humongous help. And again, shout out to our sponsor, Jim Steaks at 4th and South. Make sure to go get yourself a cheesesteak from Jim Steaks. And also shout out to Public Summit Adjusters, 215-752-0560. Again, that's Public Summit Adjusters, 215-752-0560. And a shout out to Sports Spider, our partner. They are an aggregator of sports content. Make sure to check them out. The link to their site is in the description. Our stuff, when we release it, is pinned to the top. But you can go and find all of the Philadelphia Flyers content on there. It's a pretty cool site. Podcast section, all kinds of stuff on there. So if you're searching the web, you don't need to do that. You can just go right to Sports Spider and they'll aggregate everything for you. Okay, another good one in the books. Thank you again. You the man, Vasili. We love you guys. And remember, always stay gritty.